Members, the prayer. Lord, the God of righteousness and truth, grant to our Queen and to her government, to members of the Legislative Assembly and to all in positions of responsibility, the guidance of your Spirit. May they never lead the province wrongly through love of power, desire to please, or unworthy ideas, but laying aside all private interest and prejudice, keep in mind their responsibility to seek to improve the condition of all. Amen. Honourable members, we will now be led in the singing of God Save the Queen by Ms. Brooklyn Elhard in observation of the COVID-19 public health guidelines outlined by Dr. Henshaw. Please refrain from joining us in singing. Please be seated.
Introduction of visitors. Introduction of guests. Ministerial statements. Member statements.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton City Centre has a statement to make.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. For the past 5 days, I've been sitting in isolation, waiting for my test results, and watching this government and this Minister of Health embarrassingly flail as case counts rise and more folks head to hospital terrified they'll lose their lives. I've watched this Minister of Health defend his broken app, despite revelations that it's tracked just 19 cases since the spring, and while his colleagues mocked the actually working national app. I've watched this minister cower from the spotlight and take no responsibility for the fact our contract tracing system has collapsed under his watch. We surpassed 1,000 cases this week, and this minister doesn't even have the decency to stand up and apologize for the fact that almost 90% of all COVID-19 cases have no known source of exposure. I watched this week as outbreaks skyrocketed at continuing care facilities and people died. 102 active outbreaks this week, yet this minister had the gall to pat himself on the back. And I watched as this government struggled day after day to present even rudimentary data to the public. We're 8 months in, but apparently basic public transparency is beyond the will or ability of this government. What I watched this week was a government with no clear plan, no clear strategy to protect both the lives and livelihoods of Albertans. Mr. Speaker, I waited 5 days for my test, and I was one of the lucky ones. As an MLA, I can get paid to work from home. That's not the case for many Albertans. Back in April, this government laid out its plan for the second wave: mass testing and mass contact tracing. Now, I don't know what the government did over this summer, but they certainly weren't preparing for the second wave. Mass testing is now off the table, and they've given up on serious contact tracing. This minister loves to call on Albertans to display personal responsibility. He should take his own advice. Minister, show some responsibility. Apologize for your failures and put forward a real plan to get this pandemic under control.
The Honourable Member for Athabasca, Barrhead, West Block.
Mr. Speaker, this past weekend I had the distinct pleasure of attending the reinstallation of a commemorative plaque at the Amber Valley Cultural Centre east of Athabasca. The plaque was originally unveiled in 2017 along Highway 55, but it has now been relocated to a more suitable and safer location outside the Amber Valley Cultural Centre and Museum. This plaque was created to honor the contributions of African American settlers in the Amber Valley area. Gilbert Williams, whose father was one of the first settlers in the early 1900s, now runs the Amber Valley Museum and, along with fellow board members, hosted the relocation ceremony. The community of Amber Valley was founded in 1910 by African American families from Oklahoma, Texas, and other areas of the United States who were seeking a better way of life, away from segregationist laws and racial hostility. With Canada's promotions for land in the West, an opportunity emerged for these families to start a new life. Amber Valley soon became a symbol of freedom and independence for their surrounding communities. Despite taking over land that even farmers today, with today's technologies, have difficulty with, these settlers established a vibrant community that outlasted several other prairie settlements. These African-American immigrants stood in the face of adversity while building better lives for themselves, their families, and future generations. Beating the intense Canadian winters and rugged terrain, Amber Valley symbolizes the freedom of opportunity, hard work, and tenacity found deep in the roots of our great province. It is inspiring stories such as this that teach us about the important micro-histories of immigrants that help make up our great province. Whether it is from over 100 years ago, 50 years ago, or even to this day, immigrants have always seen Alberta as a land of opportunity and freedom. Let us never forget how blessed we are to be able to call this great province home. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The honourable member for Lacombe-Panoka.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Recently, Caris Village in Henner Heights invited me to tour their new seniors facility in Lacombe. What a wonderful community. The first condo life lease complex and several duplexes are complete, but there's much more to come with the goal of providing the full spectrum of care so people can age in place. This project has been the vision of area residents since 2008, and this not-for-profit organization has done it without any government money. Kudos to them for their vision and determination. Alberta's seniors are one of the fastest growing demographics, with 650,000 over the age of 65 and 4,000 more every month. Retired Albertans will total 1 million by 2030. Many look to retirement centres or lodges for living arrangements. Whether seeking daily community or maintenance-free housing, choice is vital to the growing golden ager population in their housing arrangements. A complex issue compounded by rural living, it is great to see that our government has taken steps to address this essential concern. In addition to ventures like Caris Village in Lacombe, Alberta has now partnered with the federal government to create 88 continuing care spaces and redevelop 85 lodge spaces in 3 rural areas. Those in the prime years of life also need additional assistance with their daily needs. Seniors deserve choice in how they access that continuing care. Compassion and dignity need to be forefront. Some choose to live in a personal care home where 10 individuals live together, affording community while addressing their extended care needs. Others decide facilities like the new care centre in Lacombe is best suited to the plans they have. Options provide the opportunity for couples to stay together in their twilight years. A one-size-fits-all seniors housing program will not benefit those who have served the community and their families all their lives. I am proud to see the UC government support a multifaceted approach to seniors and continuing care facilities that includes paving the way for private, not-for-profit, and public initiatives to provide choice.
The honourable member for Edmonton Highlands, Norwood.
The Transgender Day of Remembrance is a day to remember the many trans, two-spirit, and gender non-conforming people who've lost their lives this year due to transphobia and violence. Each year, it is an emotional day for me and for so many in our community. This is a day to honor the memories of those we've lost, to hold vigil, to mourn. For over 2 decades, it has served as a day to come together and support each other. But it is a day about so much more than just words. It's about more than a nice statement from the minister, more than a quiet raising of a flag. The Trans Day of Remembrance is about action. It's about justice. It's about committing to fight so that no other trans person loses their life because of who they are. But I don't see that action coming from this government. Action would mean recognizing that everyone deserves respect. Action would mean that everyone deserves access to health care, and that would mean addressing the trans health crisis. Action would mean housing for all. Action would mean recognizing intersectionality instead of dismissing it as a kooky theory. Yet we see the opposite from this government: attacks on gay-straight alliances, a refusal to ban conversion therapy, rolling back an inclusive curriculum grounded in multiple perspectives, and attacks on crucial public services. And we see these attacks when we know that lives are at stake, especially right now in 2020. We've all struggled with the impacts of COVID, but we know the health and mental health of trans folks is being disproportionately impacted. We know all people are feeling more isolated than ever. So we need to commit to doing even more, to doing better. On the Trans Day of Remembrance, I will take the time to mourn those we've lost, But every day in this chamber, I will fight like hell for the living, because trans lives matter, Black trans lives matter, and anything less is unacceptable. Thank you.
The honourable member for West Yellowhead.
Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to stand here in this House to bring attention to just some of the jobs and investment our government has been creating, even in the wake of the COVID pandemic, the global recession, and the energy crash. There have been many new and exciting projects that have created jobs which are vital to Alberta's recovery plan. Beginning with the energy industry, Alberta's government has been hard at work ensuring the completion of the TMX pipeline and Keystone XL pipeline. Shovels were in the ground late last year, and work continues to be done by thousands of Albertans. Additionally, the historic Section 11 agreement recently signed by the Minister of Environment and Parks will create 5,500 jobs on the Nova Gas transmission line expansion. The construction of Canada's largest solar farm is set to be completed late next year. This $500 million project is located near the village of Lamond in Vulcan County and spans over 1,900 hectares of land. It is expected to produce 400 megawatts of energy, power 100,000 homes, and create 500 jobs. Also, a recent announcement of a 1,000 megawatt power plant in Edson will create over 800 jobs during construction. Lowe's Canada has decided to open a distribution facility in the High Plains Industrial Park in Calgary. This project is expected to be operational by fall of 2021. It's worth over $120 million and will create hundreds of permanent full-time positions when they are needed most. Also, as part of Alberta's economic recovery plan, our government provided $175 million to recapitalize Alberta Enterprise Corporation, which will create between 2,500 and 4,400 jobs. All of this hard work has resulted in a gain of 23,000 jobs last month and 5 straight months of job gains, along with a steadily increasing employment rate. We still have a long way to go. Our economic challenges have impacted far too many families across this province. I want to reassure all Albertans that this government is working tirelessly to attract investment, create jobs, and pave the path towards a better future. Thank you.
The honourable member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Mr. Speaker, tomorrow we will celebrate National Child Day, just as we have for 30 years, to commemorate Canada's adoption of the United Nations Declaration and the Convention on the Rights of the Child. It includes that children have the right to be safe, to have their basic needs met, to be connected to their cultural and traditional background, and to learn in ways that support that. Mr. Speaker, this is not simply a day to celebrate. It's a reminder of our duty as elected members of this Assembly that investing in our children as the future of this province is our #1 priority. But I'm continually shocked by the decisions of this government when it comes to our children. This UCP government refused to step up and properly fund education during COVID, abdicating their responsibility to Alberta's children. Overcrowded classrooms are leading to outbreaks that are shutting down entire classrooms and schools and putting the education of our children at risk. The UCP voted against including recognition of the rights of children in the UN Convention into their Choice in Education Act. Why? Ideology. They reduced child benefits to thousands of Alberta families living on the edge of poverty. They ended affordable $25 per day childcare, reduced subsidies and supports to families and childcare operators. Time will tell what damage this government has done to the 50% reduction in child poverty that the NDP achieved when we were in government. Just this week, the UCP voted down an amendment to a private member's bill that would have recognized the horrors of residential schools and the murdered and missing Indigenous women and girls as what it is, genocide. This government hired individuals with racist views about Indigenous people that want to remove residential schools from our curriculum. Meanwhile, the percentage of Indigenous children in care is going up under this government's watch. They cut PUF funding for young children with disabilities, cutting them off from necessary supports in their critical early years. And now, Bill 39 before this Assembly does nothing to improve the safety of children in childcare or ensure that all children have access to quality early learning. So tomorrow on National Child Day, I encourage the members of this government to take a look at your record in this House and ask yourself, am I standing up for the rights of all children? And if the answer is no, it's the children of this province that are paying the price.
The honourable member for Drayton Valley Devon.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. With the events that have hit us in the past couple of years, it's been a hard road for Alberta. Government revenues are down by 25% overall due to a wide range of issues. This includes, but is not limited to, drops in energy, job and corporate losses, and COVID-19. Like many in the province, my constituency in Drayton Valley Devon has been hit hard. Families are struggling to pay their bills and provide for their families. They both want and need jobs. In response to this province's challenges, this government has taken major steps to get things moving again. The corporate tax cut was accelerated, dropping down to 8% ahead of the schedule. We have moved up infrastructure spending that was previously scheduled for years down the road. This has led to a record year investment of over $10 billion for the various projects that include roads, bridges, schools, and hospitals. In my constituency, that has meant more than $60 million in government support through grants and infrastructure for schools and smaller businesses to not only help with COVID, but also to spur growth. We've introduced legislation to ensure investor confidence in new technology, like geothermal energy. We are working to diversify our energy sector to encourage the production of hydrogen. There is major potential for abandoned wells to be used for hydrogen extraction, which will capitalize on much of the specializations that we already have here in the province, including drilling. We are taking strides in diversifying agriculture within the constituency and across this province by growing the industrial hemp industry. Why have we been doing all this, Mr. Speaker? Because at the end of the day, you need a strong economy to fund the social net of services that we rely on: education, healthcare, disability supports, and the list goes on. What this government has been doing is working, Mr. Speaker. Despite the dislocating effects of COVID pandemic and the precipitous drop in oil prices, we have seen 5 straight months of job growth here in Alberta. More than 250,000 jobs have been added back so far, and investment is returning.
The honourable member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise in the House today to recognize an important organization, Calgary Reads. Calgary Reads is an organization dedicated to building a community for children to discover the benefits of reading. 1 in 4 Canadian children start school already behind their peers in literacy and language skills, and Calgary Reads, along with their volunteers, is there to help reduce this number and improve children's lives by helping them become confident, joyful readers. Reading is a fundamental skill that has a profound impact on our lives, and it begins at an early age. When you read aloud to a child, you open the doors to new worlds, new perspectives, and new opportunities to grow. Reading and talking about ideas in a book reinforces neural pathways. Nearly 80% of a child's brain is wired in his or her first 5 years. But it's easy to take our ability to read for granted. It doesn't just happen. It took effort, practice, and someone who took the time to teach us. Many children don't have that at an early age, and that's where Calgary Reads volunteers step in. The program that I volunteer with, which is currently on hold due to COVID, is called We Reads. That's W-E-E Reads, not to be confused, and no affiliation with the We charity. We Reads brings volunteers into schools to read aloud to students in kindergarten and grade 1, taking a proactive, early intervention approach to help strengthen language and literacy skills. I remember Sarah, one of the first students I volunteered with. She was shy and nervous the first time I met her, timidly leaning into me as I read to her. Months later, she would leap from her seat to greet me and take my hand as she practically ran to the library and would excitedly pull out book after book she wanted us to read. Calgary Reads helps children develop a love and confidence for reading that sets a critical foundation for learning in the future.
The honourable member for Calgary-Fish Creek.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Since March of this year, small businesses across Alberta and right in my own constituency of Calgary-Fish Creek have faced great challenges brought upon them by the deep commercial impacts of COVID-19. Hence, Mr. Speaker, it is now more important than ever to recognize that small business is indeed big business. Our once thriving small business sector is populated by enterprising Albertans delivering valuable services, unique character, and welcoming charm to our communities while employing over 1.3 million people. Mr. Speaker, right in Calgary-Fish Creek, you can savor the welcoming taste and tunes at a small music cafe renowned for Calgary's best hot chocolate. Or maybe take a ribbing at our local smokehouse, or even travel the world with exotic foods at Alberta's most diverse food hall, or tapping into local offerings of fresh craft ale. These unique businesses are down every street and around every corner across our great province. Alberta's government has been diligently working since the beginning of COVID-19 to ensure businesses survive and thrive with initiatives like Bill 14, 23, 33, and 35. Bills that have or will aid Alberta business with rent and utility relief, investment attraction, and tax advantages. Alberta's government will continue to provide support and offer hope through targeted small business legislation. And Mr. Speaker, we're not done yet. Within our government's $14 billion recovery plan, $200 million in grants will be provided to small businesses to support relaunch of operation. Additionally, our job creation tax cut will ensure Alberta is the most business and investor-friendly jurisdiction in the entire country. While Alberta's government continues to give a hand up to small businesses across our province in support of their survival, I humbly ask all Albertans to embrace, support and promote local businesses to ensure they survive today and thrive tomorrow while also protecting vital services and local jobs. Mr. Speaker, I extend this challenge to all Albertans to find safe and responsible ways in the weeks and months ahead to share their gratitude for the homegrown entrepreneurial spirit that always makes us Alberta proud. Thank you.
Honourable members, it's time for oral question period, and the Leader of Her Majesty's loyal opposition has the call.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've lost 110 Albertans to COVID this month alone. Over the last week, new cases have ranged up to 1,000 per day. Estimates suggest in more than 90% of recent cases, we have no idea how they got sick. That is what uncontrolled spread looks like, and that is what is worrying Albertans. And they deserve to know what their risk level is in order to protect themselves and stop the spread. So to the Minister of Health, what is the current projected case number and R value of COVID-19 in Alberta for December 1st? Good question.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, again, this question's been asked. I'm happy to answer a second time. The modelling was presented in the spring to Albertans, and the modelling has not changed. We still have the three scenarios that we are going to be for the different levels we anticipate. AHS continues as well to disclose in a transparent way the capacity of the hospital system. The ministry continues to provide updates on a daily basis through the website, and Dr. Hinshaw is continually making herself available 3 times a week to answer any questions the media have for her.
The Leader of the Opposition.
And yet the minister refused to answer that question. We know that Edmonton's portion of the 70 Stage 1 ICU beds has long since been surpassed. We also know that Edmonton is projected to exceed Stage 2 very soon. Now, Stage 2 means that non-COVID ICU patients are moved out of ICU. ICU staff are both fewer and less specialized, and the overall quality of ICU care is diminished for everyone. So can the minister tell Edmontonians on what specific date his models project Edmonton will be moving into this reduced stage of ICU care?
The Minister of Health.
I'm happy to answer that question. AHS has an early warning system to let them know when they start to feel the pressures. It's actually 4 levels. Is their vocabulary 4 levels of their response for surge plans. They continue to look at that early warning system so that they can have a glimpse into the future, so they know what to be planning for. They continue to, as they did in the spring, to make sure that they have all the resources necessary to be able to make sure they can increase capacity in ICUs and for ventilators, other PPE, as well as all the hospital beds that are needed throughout all of the 5 zones.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, again, no answer. We know this modelling exists. The minister has it. The public deserves to see it. This government is putting 99% of the responsibility of stopping this virus onto individual Albertans, but he refuses to show them the numbers. He has real answers to these questions on his desk. Either the minister is not reading the models he's given and is incompetent, or he is willfully hiding the information from Albertans about a virus that is jeopardizing their health, their safety, and the capacity of our hospitals. Which is it?
The Minister.
Mr. Speaker, it's not modeling. It's an early warning system that AHS has developed for them to have a way to analyze the pressures that they're going to have in any situation in coming weeks. So it's an early warning system that AHS has developed. It's not a model. There's nothing to be disclosing to Albertans. Albertans have all the information in front of them right now through the information, the statistics on a daily basis, through the website the ministry provides, whether it's the capacity that AHS is experiencing and the pressures to the capacity, as well Dr. Hinshaw, and continuing to make herself available and answering any questions on
the Honourable Leader of the Opposition for a second set of questions.
The information information is not being made to Albertans. This is the most secretive government in the country. Now, right now, we can't trace the source of infection for hundreds of people every day. We also can't trace their contacts. The system is overwhelmed, and the soonest we can expect some of the new tracers to come online is by Christmas. That's because this minister refused to act weeks or months ago, despite repeated warnings. Was this minister really the only person who couldn't see that a second wave was coming? And if not, why did he wait until the middle of the second wave to start hiring contact tracers?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, that's completely false. We started before the pandemic at 50 contact tracers, and throughout the going back to February, March, Mr. Speaker, AHS began to hire more and more contact tracers. Got up to 800, and now we're still continuing to hire. We're going to still continue to provide them with the resources to continue to hire, working with Stats Can to be able to help us with contact tracing, as well as many other independent providers wanting to step up and help with contact tracing. Nothing that a member said was true at all, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to make sure we are doing all the work that we started many, many months ago.
The Leader of the Opposition.
This minister told Albertans we had 800 contact tracers months ago, and then they stopped and they waited. In Calgary alone, there are more than 8,000 students and 700 staff in self-isolation. Here's the chair of Calgary Catholic, and I quote, "We haven't been able to find subs for classes, and what that means is our teaching staff and admin staff, who are also our contact tracers, are providing that coverage." So to the Health Minister, you claim contact tracing is focused on priority settings like education, but it's teachers who are actually doing that work in our schools. Why are you failing to meet the demand so comprehensively?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Mr. Speaker, we're not. She just said that we had stopped hiring contact tracers. I'm going to say it again. I keep on saying this, and she keeps on ignoring it. Mr. Speaker, we never stopped. We have continued to hire throughout the pandemic, and we will continue to do that, Mr. Speaker. We're going to continue to hire through AHS, but also by working with independent partners, also working with other agencies who are stepping up to assist AHS with contact tracing. Exactly the right thing to do, Mr. Speaker, and we're going to continue to do to make sure that AHS has all the resources that it needs to be able to respond to this pandemic.
The Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, we have seen more than 41,000 cases of COVID-19 in Alberta to date, yet this minister's app has traced contacts in just 19 of them. On Tuesday, when I asked him to account for that, he claimed it was untrue, notwithstanding published statements from his own officials confirming that 19 is indeed the correct number. So, does the minister not understand that his decision to establish such an excessive distance from the truth has permanently undermined any faith that Albertans have left in this government's ability to manage this pandemic?
The Minister of Health.
Speaker, as I've said earlier this week, the comments of the member for Edmonton Strathcona regarding the pandemic and response to the pandemic and all the tools, including this minor tool, to be able to relieve the pressures of our contact tracers, Mr. Speaker, is appalling. That she continues to undermine the credibility of this app is disgusting. It's one of the tools that we provided. It is a contact tracing app to help the pressures of the contact tracers, Mr. Speaker, and they continue. She's angry and yelling at me, Mr. Speaker, because she's unhappy to hear the truth, that she is undermining this tool, undermining its credibility, undermining the hard work of our public health officials.
Order. Order. Comments made off the record or on the record, if they are in earshot of the Speaker, may still be deemed unparliamentary. Additionally the use of first names is also unparliamentary. The member for Edmonton City Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. This Premier has continually waxed poetic about personal responsibility being key to getting through this pandemic. However, the actions of he and his cabinet show that they believe they're above those rules. The Premier sat maskless next to Aaron O'Toole at his party's AGM and then complained when people asked why he didn't wear a mask. And the Ministers of Finance and Municipal Affairs didn't wear masks while at a Grand Prairie event 2 weekends ago, despite being in close proximity to many seniors. To the Minister of Health, have you considered speaking with your colleagues about practicing what they preach?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Speaker, This is, again, the hypocrisy of the NDP. The NDP themselves are attending super spreader events like Edmonton Glenora, recently spending time in Red Deer at a potential super spreader event. This is the NDP continuing throughout this pandemic, Mr. Speaker, to be hypocrites. We, of course, are going to continue to communicate to all Albertans that masks are an important way for us to protect ourselves and our loved ones and healthcare workers. That's why we distributed 40 million masks throughout Alberta to all Albertans, because we've been, quite frankly, the most pro-mask jurisdiction in this country.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Mr. Speaker, the hypocrisy comes from this minister and his colleagues who fail to show leadership in the midst of a public health crisis. Some members of this government caucus, in fact, have gone even further in their aversion to mask wearing. The member for Lac St. Anne Parkland, for example, had the audacity to claim that wearing masks were actually driving spread of COVID-19 in Calgary and Edmonton. So, to the minister, will you apologize on behalf of that member for spreading deadly misinformation during the greatest public health emergency that we've likely ever faced in our province?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And as I can continue to talk about how we are the most pro-mask jurisdiction in the country, Edmonton, Strathcona is very upset to hear that, but we distributed 40 million masks for all Albertans to be able to start socializing the idea of masks being used in Alberta throughout the pandemic. But I'm also waiting for the members opposite to start apologizing to all Albertans for undermining our public health officials, undermining their advice, undermining their credibility and the independence of them, undermining their guidance. It's disgusting behavior during a pandemic, and I'm waiting for the other members opposite to start apologizing.
The honourable member for Edmonton City Centre.
Mr. Speaker, this is not a minister to be lecturing anybody on disgusting behavior. Yesterday, our opposition caucus called for the province to make mask wearing mandatory in public spaces in municipalities with high counts of COVID-19. The minister dodged that call and made obscure references to advisors to Donald Trump. Perhaps that's where he's taking his cues from that ousted president who refused to wear a mask for months and then caught COVID-19. That was ridiculous. It was an embarrassing answer from this minister. So to that minister, will he do the right thing and lead by example? Will he commit that every single member of the UCP caucus will wear a mask in public spaces until this pandemic is over, yes or no?
The order, the Honourable Minister of Health.
Members opposite are obviously very upset to have it pointed out to them that there are only two jurisdictions where politicians are attacking our public health officials, and the behavior of the NDP here in Alberta has been disgusting, Mr. Speaker. But I will, again, point out to them this past Monday, Dr. Bonnie Henry, the chief MOH in BC under the NDP government in BC, published a column that was entitled, "Why BC Doesn't Have a Universal Mask Mandate." And I'll repeat, again, her words, quote, "An order can never replace our personal commitment. We need to be responsible for our own actions. That is how we all pull together, Mr. Speaker," end quote.
The Honourable Order. The Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora is the only one with the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. We've been warning the Education Minister for months that Alberta schools need teachers during this pandemic. Like most of this government's COVID response, we got a lot of no action. The worst excuse was that there weren't enough teachers. Today, I stood with two new certified Alberta-trained teachers who are eager to start their careers, but they can't find work. Minister, why won't you fund Alberta schools properly and get these teachers in front of students?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. As the honourable member knows, that staffing is managed by school authorities, not by the province. The unfortunate reality is that there is only a finite number of certificated teachers in the province. And in fact, school boards across this province are hiring right now. We have CBE, Edmonton Catholic, Battle River, Elk Island Catholic, and many more other school divisions all have active postings right now. So I would encourage the member opposite to direct those individuals to those school divisions.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Glenora.
They've applied, Mr. Speaker, but budgets are set by the province. The province cut funding for students in this province, and as a result, teachers aren't being hired to meet the demand. School districts across Alberta are struggling as tens of thousands of students and staff have been forced into isolation because this minister has failed to act on class sizes. Whole classes, whole grades, whole schools being sent home, and yet we have young, healthy teachers sitting at home searching for work because this minister chose to prioritize a $4.7 billion giveaway over hiring teachers to keep schools safe. Why won't this minister reverse her cuts and get these teachers?
The Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, this is just not so. The College of Alberta School Superintendents have confirmed that it is not a funding issue. It is a staff availability issue. Their president stated, and I quote, "One of the issues facing most school divisions right now is a shortage of qualified substitute teachers. Across Alberta, school divisions have budgeted for this anticipated increased need, and many are actively recruiting and hiring qualified, available substitute teachers on an ongoing basis." I would encourage the member opposite to direct anyone she knows to these school divisions.
The honourable member.
Mr. Speaker, surely the minister must know that when education workers, teachers are at home applying on jobs and they can't get them because there isn't enough funding to hire them, that when she gives those talking points, it is completely disrespectful to all of the Albertans who want to get into classrooms and work with kids. How can she stand in this place and continue to recite talking points she gave when she cut funding, when she's causing chaos, and when she's leaving kids unsafe and people unemployed who can help?
The Honourable Minister of Education.
Mr. Speaker, as I've said, I just quoted the president of the Alberta College of School Superintendents. He is in a position of authority. He is one of many superintendents across this province that are right now recruiting and hiring teachers. So when the member opposite would like me to wave my magic wand and have these teachers jump up from the ground, there are not enough qualified teachers in the province, full stop. And there's many positions available. I would encourage the member opposite to direct teachers that she knows looking for positions to those school divisions.
The order, the honourable member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Albertans, our fellow Canadians, and our American cousins and people from all over the world actually have been grappling with this COVID-19 pandemic and how it's changed our lives. We know that many Albertans have had to self-isolate when sick or waiting for test results, and we know that many have had to miss work because of this, causing a great deal of stress about how they would pay their bills. To the Minister of Finance, what finance supports are available to Albertans who miss work because of requirements to isolate?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and President Treasury Board has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for the question. The Canada Recovery Sickness Benefit is available to all Albertans if they're required to self-isolate or are sick due to COVID-19. The benefit provides $500 per week for up to 2 weeks. Mr. Speaker, Albertans have disproportionately funded the federal government for decades, and so Albertans should feel very free to utilize federal government services. The reality is they paid for them.
The Honourable Member for Lac St. Anne Parkland.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister for his response. Given that most Albertans have been able to avoid contracting COVID through responsible actions, but also given that there are many instances where Albertans may need to care for their family or loved ones who have COVID-19, can the Minister of Finance please tell Albertans about the financial supports available for those who may have to stay at home and care for someone with COVID-19?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the member for the question. As I've mentioned, Albertans have already paid for these supports through their taxes, and should they need to access a benefit in order to care for a family member who's contracted COVID-19, the Canada Recovery Caregiving Benefit is available. The caregiving benefit provides income support of $500 per week for Albertans who have to stop work and care for family members.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the Minister for his response. Given that the large majority of Albertans have acted responsibly and followed public health guidelines, but given some Albertans have had concerns about their job security when they are required to miss work. To the Minister of Finance, could you tell us what the government has done to ensure Albertans who have to miss work for these reasons can do so without worrying about their job security?
The Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Back in the spring when COVID-19 was just beginning to impact Albertans, we acted quickly. The Minister of Labour and Immigration updated employment standards to allow for 14 days of job-protected leave for Albertans directed to self-isolate. The Minister also extended the personal and family responsibility leave specific to COVID-19. This leave allows Albertans to stay home to care for children affected by school or daycare restrictions or any family member who is sick or has to self-isolate because of COVID-19.
Member for Edmonton, Highlands, Norwood.
The evidence is clear. The economic effects of the pandemic are disproportionately impacting women. We know that many experts have called for a gender-focused recovery plan to boost the economy. We know that women are significantly shouldering the burden of caregiving during the pandemic, both professionally and personally, with little support from this government. To the Minister of Finance, what are you doing to support women through the pandemic? Albertans want specific and tangible examples.
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. We absolutely know that women have been disproportionately impacted by COVID-19 and feeling those effects over the last number of months. Our government has stepped up to make strategic investments in key areas to help with this. Mr. Speaker, part of that is providing almost $100 million in partnership with the federal government for the childcare sector through our recovery plan here in Alberta. Mr. Speaker, also we introduced $2 an hour wage increases for healthcare aides working at contracted continuing care sites, a sector that is also predominantly staffed by women.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Highlands Norwood.
This government has called for a 4% pay cut across the board for public service workers, and for some sectors it will be a 7% pay cut. And this government, which ran on a platform of jobs, has in fact culled thousands of jobs, leaving many women unemployed. Again, to the Minister of Finance, have you done a gender-based analysis on the proposed pay cut? And please explain why your government is contributing to the gender pay gap rather than helping to solve it.
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President, Treasury Board.
Mr. Speaker, the reality is, in our current economic environment, thousands of small businesses and business owners have had to make very difficult decisions around their staff, both in reducing wages and for many actually laying off long-time loyal staff. And Mr. Speaker, given our great fiscal challenge, we can no longer ignore these fiscal and economic realities in the province. And that's why we have brought forward what I would call a very responsible mandate of a -3, or in this case, a -4% for public sector workers.
The Honourable Member.
This government is ignoring the needs of women. They're cutting pay and jobs, which will no doubt have a significant impact on women in our province. And this government has no plan for affordable childcare. We know that a combination of higher childcare costs and lower incomes will lead to more women being forced to stay at home because it isn't economically viable for them to find employment. To the Minister of Children's Services, we know your Premier wishes he could go back in time, but are you also hoping to return our province back to the 1950s?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Mr. Speaker, as a working parent of 2 young children, I can tell you I know firsthand the challenges that many parents across Alberta face in accessing high-quality, affordable childcare across the province. What we won't do is what the members opposite did, was pick winners and losers, create mass disruption, and use an ideological approach to childcare. We're going to continue to listen. For the first time in over a decade, we consulted with childcare operators, preschool operators right across this province, something the member opposite never chose to do. We're also continuing to listen to Alberta parents and step up and support these operators so that parents can get back to work.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. In order to curb the spread of COVID-19 to protect Albertans and our economy, we need to know where the spread is happening. This government has continued to assert that spread in school and childcare settings is rare, not a factor. They say this despite their own evidence that the source of 88% of cases is currently unknown. We know there are childcare centres on the outbreak list, and when this happens, it impacts Albertans and the economy. To the Minister of Children's Services, how many childcare centres have COVID outbreaks? How many cases have been traced to those centres, and how fast are parents being notified?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Mr. Speaker, I am pleased to say that right across this province, childcare operators have been working very closely and following the guidelines that have been put forward by the Chief Medical Officer of Health and working with AHS if cases are in fact identified. There are very few cases across the province where we have had confirmed cases. I can provide numbers from the beginning of November. We had 38 cases in staff right across this province and 38 children as well. Totals from April to November were 135 staff and 160 children.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Given there are currently a number of childcare centres with outbreaks who are frustrated this has happened when they followed the guidelines and there is no coordinated support from Children's Services and AHS, given that one Edmonton childcare centre, which serves many frontline healthcare workers, recently had more than 20 positive cases at one time, and almost all of the children were asymptomatic throughout, and this resulted in a dozen doctors who were forced to isolate. To the same minister, how can you be sure that the protocols you have in place are effective to stop the spread of COVID-19 in childcare when you can't, with any confidence, identify the source of more than 15% of cases?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Mr. Speaker, I believe that we are truly fortunate here in Alberta to have a Chief Medical Officer of Health like Dr. Dina Hinshaw, who has been providing very clear guidance to childcare operators and to Albertans on how we can come together to slow the spread of COVID-19. We have very positive feedback from childcare operators. We've had 7 town halls, I believe, since the beginning of the pandemic to answer any questions that they have and get clarity on guidance where it has been needed. We know that childcare is hugely important in getting Alberta parents back to work, and we want to make sure kids and families and workers remain safe.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton-Whitemud.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Well, given that essential frontline workers like doctors and nurses depend on childcare in order to continue fighting against COVID-19, and given that the loss of childcare has an immense negative impact on our economy by reducing the ability for parents to go back to work, and given that despite strict adherence to guidelines, outbreaks due to asymptomatic transmission put these childcare businesses at risk, and given that the UCP has ended asymptomatic testing, which has not stopped the spread, to the same minister, what are you doing to support childcare providers in keeping kids and staff safe, keep programs open, and what will you do to help them survive if they have to close?
The Honourable Minister of Children's Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. What we'll continue to do is meet with and listen to childcare operators, day home providers, preschool operators right across this province. Over the past number of months, we've worked together with the federal government to provide nearly $100 million in funding. We had heard loud and clear that we had to leave enough flexibility for these providers to meet the demands, both their business demands in some cases and the demands of parents. For example, not asking for fees to be refunded if parents have to stay home and self-isolate to reduce the spread of COVID. Mr. Speaker, we'll continue to listen to Alberta parents and operators.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Pagan has a question.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Last month, the Alberta Petrochemicals Incentive Program, APIP, was launched as a key piece of Alberta's recovery plan. It will attract petrochemical investments, create tens of thousands of jobs in our province, and continue to diversify our economy while drawing from our abundant reserves of natural gas. To the Associate Minister of Natural Gas and Electricity, why is there such significant opportunities in Alberta's petrochemical sector, and why is now the right time to implement this program?
The Honourable Minister of Finance and President of Treasury Board has risen.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Alberta's petrochemical sector is already a $12.1 billion industry in Alberta, which accounts for 1/3 of manufacturing exports. But there's significant room to grow as the global demand for petrochemicals is expected to boom. We're prepared to seize upon the opportunities in this sector to create good-paying jobs for Albertans and attract investments across the province.
The Honourable Member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the Minister for the answer. Given that Alberta already has a petrochemical sector that is already a $12.1 billion industry, and given that Alberta is a leader throughout the country in petrochemicals, to the same minister, how is this new incentive program different to the previous petrochemicals diversification program?
The Minister of Finance, President of Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member for the question. APIP is a market-based, industry-driven program. Companies will receive grant funding covering 12% of eligible capital costs once a facility is up and running and employing Albertans. Unlike the Petrochemical Diversification Program, APIP doesn't pick winners or losers. Instead, APIP is broad-based and open to all petrochemical manufacturers that use the feedstock of natural gas, including petrochemical fertilizers, hydrogen, and fuel plants.
Honourable Member for Calgary-Pagan.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and again to the Minister for the answer. Given that the Liberal federal government has begun implementing a ban on some single-use plastics, and given that single-use plastics are of the products that petrochemicals produce, to the Minister, how would the single-use plastics ban impact the petrochemical sector, and how would recycled resins impact the petrochemical industry in Alberta?
The Minister of Finance.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. While we fundamentally disagree with the Liberal government's plastics ban, we recognize the importance of plastics recycling. That's why we're working to become the Western North American Centre of Excellence for Plastics Diversion and Recycling by 2030. Alberta is well positioned thanks to our petrochemical manufacturing industry, lower transportation costs, and the development of enhanced recycling technologies within the province. In Canada, only 9% of all post-consumer plastics are recycled. That's an opportunity cost of $7.8 billion. Mr. Speaker, we're looking to fill that void.
The honourable member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Mr. Speaker, let's go back to the minister's shipwreck of a Parks town hall earlier this week. You know, the one that's being mocked in the media and by just about everyone who joined in that wasn't on the UCP payroll. During the town hall, the minister was asked by his little brother if he was opening up Alberta parks for coal mining. He said, quote, "Most of these places would not even be big enough for a coal mine." Hardly a firm denial. To the minister, will you rule out any mining in existing Alberta parks? Or is ripping up our natural areas for mining part of your grand plan?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Parks.
I also said, and it was very, very clear, none of these facilities could be opened up for coal mining. Period, Mr. Speaker. I don't know how much more I could provide confirmation for the member from Edmonton Gold Bar, Mr. Speaker, but again, he continues to focus on his relationship with organizations like CPAWS and Y2Y, who we know are funded by the Tides Foundation, Mr. Speaker, who are dedicated to shutting down our largest industries inside this province and dedicated to stopping Albertans from even being able to access parks of the backcountry, Mr. Speaker. At the end of the day, we know the NDP's secret goal is to stop Albertans from going to their backyards and to shut down all of our industries, Mr. Speaker. We'll provide parks, but we're going to make sure we can also go to work.
The Honourable, the member for Edmonton Gold Bar.
Given that this minister supported the lifting of the 1976 coal policy with zero consultation except with Australian billionaires and the Coal Association, and given that if this phony town hall is any indication, the minister isn't interested in hearing what Albertans have to think about his horrible policies, only his fellow MLAs. And given this minister loves to boast that the election gave him the right to rip up our parks and sell them to the highest bidders, to the minister, can you point to exactly where in your platform you committed to selling off our parks so that they could be carved up for coal mining?
The Honourable Minister of Environment and Parks.
Mr. Speaker, not one park is being sold and not one park is being turned into a coal mine. The honourable member knows that, but again, he's working very hard with his friends in the Tides Foundation and CPAWS and Y2Y to be able to move forward with the main objective of the NDP. You see it right there, Mr. Speaker, to move forward, to be able to shut down access to the wild places that Albertans want to go. He wants to continue with what they did when he was in government, which is to try to shut down places like the Bighorn backcountry, Mr. Speaker, and stop people from being able to go and access them, and even, Mr. Speaker, to camp or to be able to provide lodge services, Mr. Speaker, for people who enjoy wild places. Shame on him, Mr. Speaker, and we will not do that.
The Honourable Member.
Given that the minister's disaster of a Parks Town Hall does not qualify as consultation with Albertans, and given that he didn't consult on his parks fire sale or his policy to proliferate coal mining in our beautiful province, and given that this minister loves to puff out his chest and yell in the House, but not address any of the questions that are asked to him, but that many are beginning to question whether he even has a clue about how to do his job. Given that I will be hosting a conversation next week on parks and coal mining where I will actually be taking questions from real Albertans, to the minister, will you join me for this conversation, or are you too scared to?
The Honourable Minister.
Mr. Speaker, I noticed when that member was a minister, he didn't bother to come to Rocky Mountain House when invited when he was trying to shut down their backyard with his partners in the Tides Foundation, Mr. Speaker. I was excited to have a town hall with my colleagues the other day. We got over 480 questions from the public. Excited to answer them, Mr. Speaker. We'll continue to consult with Albertans, but we don't need to consult with Albertans about the NDP's plan to sell parks to keep talking about, because we are not selling parks, Mr. Speaker, and we will not be lectured by a member who celebrated the death of a female politician, Mr. Speaker. He lost all credibility in this place when he did that.
The order. The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View has the call.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our energy sector is hurting due to the pandemic and low oil prices. The Canadian Association of Oil Well Drilling Contractors and the Petroleum Services Association of Canada expect this to be the worst year for drilling in decades. We need to support our energy industry and also diversify the industry to build a more resilient economy. Recently, we released our geothermal proposal. It would have drillers back to work immediately. The government proposal fails to include incentives. To the government, will you adopt our Jobs Right Now strategy? And if not, why not?
The Honourable, the Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, full stop. We will not be lectured by the NDP when it comes to jobs or the economy, Mr. Speaker. The worst government in the history of this province who sat around while your constituents and my constituents were being decimated by their policies that attacked our largest industries, that attacked job creators inside this province, Mr. Speaker. In my mind, now, of course, the member can ask any question they want in their chamber, but that member has no credibility to even ask questions about jobs, Mr. Speaker, and should go back and apologize to Albertans for her disaster while she was in government.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Given that we are currently, under the UCP government, seeing mass layoffs across the oil and gas industry, Suncor announced they're laying off 2,000 staff and Cenovus plans to lay off 2,100. And given that our geothermal proposal aims to create 10,000 jobs right now and replace most of the drilling days lost and has been endorsed by the Canadian Geothermal Association, to the government, will you commit to adopting our recommendations and creating new jobs today?
The Honourable Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, that honourable member was part of a government who did no legislation on geothermal to help the industry, Mr. Speaker. Before this House right now is a geothermal bill from our Energy Minister who's moving forward the geothermal industry inside this province, Mr. Speaker. So the question's simple. I'll give her an opportunity later this afternoon. Will her party pass the geothermal bill today to put Albertans back to work, Mr. Speaker? Because we'll give her a chance to do it just shortly.
The Honourable Member.
Given, Mr. Speaker, that the government has taken an important step towards geothermal by creating a legal framework, but given that our proposal goes further by creating incentives and also proposes ways to turn oil and gas liabilities into assets, and given that we have a significant number of amendments coming, and given that this government is not releasing information on what it's doing with the federal money to deal with orphan wells, to the minister, will you commit to a full public report on your orphan well strategy by the end of this fall session? If not, why not?
The Honourable Minister of Finance, President of the Treasury Board.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. Our government released a very comprehensive economic recovery plan in June to respond to the great economic challenge this province is facing. Part of that strategy, Mr. Speaker, was to roll out the site rehabilitation program. That's a program that will assist the industry and a subsector of the industry to clean up well sites that are abandoned and need reclamation work. Mr. Speaker, we're committed to that program. Our Energy Minister is working with the industry on rolling that program out and reducing the province's environmental liabilities.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Falcon Ridge.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. COVID-19 has changed the business plans of many organizations. Particularly, the ability to hire employees has been nearly impossible with constantly changing safety and health protocols. However, I have heard from medical professionals that AHS has instituted temporary hiring freezes in certain regions of the province. To the Minister of Health, is this assertion true? And regardless, how has COVID-19 affected the hiring practices of Alberta Health Services?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And to be clear, there is no freeze on hiring of clinical staff in AHS in any part of the province. On the contrary, AHS is recruiting aggressively, and they're continuing to hire more nurses and other staff with our government's full support. We said that the response to the pandemic would not be constrained by budget, and we stand by that promise, Mr. Speaker. There may be confusion due to changes AHS is making to balance staffing with patient needs or due to vacancy management, but to repeat, there is no hiring freeze. Staffing levels are going up, not down.
The Honourable Member for Calgary Falcon Ridge.
Thank you, Minister. Given that staffing has been issued during COVID-19 as nurses, doctors and other medical staff had to work considerable overtime while still following safety protocols like mandatory quarantine when exposed to the virus. And given that COVID-19 has strained Alberta's healthcare system as resources have depleted considerably, Again, I ask the same minister, what has the ministry in coordination with AHS done to address staffing issues and depleted resources as a result of COVID-19?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And first, let me say thank you to our doctors, our nurses, and others. They're tired. They're putting themselves at risk to serve patients, and the thoughts of every member in this House are with them and their patients. AHS continues to hire the staff that they need. They currently have over 1,200 jobs posted, most of them for nurses and healthcare aides. Staffing continues to be a challenge due to sickness, isolation due to outbreaks, staff who need to look after children who are isolating, and staff redeployed to support the pandemic response, such as contact tracing and assessment centres.
The Honourable Member.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to the Minister. Given that many opponents claim our government is Americanizing Alberta's healthcare system, and given that the same opponents claim our government is driving away doctors across the province, despite a recent report published by College of Physicians and Surgeons of Alberta that contends the contrary, with the net gain of almost 250 doctors from July to September this year, again, I ask the same minister, can you please dispel the opposition's misleading concerns by explaining the extensive efforts our government has taken to retain doctors in Alberta?
The Honourable Minister of Health.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. The member's right. The NDP continue to promote disinformation because it's all they know how to do, Mr. Speaker. The reality is doctors continue to come to Alberta because it's the best place in Canada to practice. Our pay rates are the highest of all provinces. We continue to work with physicians to provide alternate relationship plans when new approaches can serve them and their patients better. And we continue to meet with the AMA and work toward an agreement despite the disinformation from the members opposite.
Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie is next.
Last Thursday, the Premier created panic and confusion when he announced that new small business restrictions. He ordered small fitness, yoga, dance studios to stop operations with less than 24 hours notice. The owners of these facilities were told nothing more than we need to do this to flatten the curve. There was no evidence presented as to why their businesses were targeted for closure. To the Minister, these studios were following the same public safety protocols as the large corporate gyms. Can you show clear evidence why the large gyms remain open while these others are forced to close?
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And this is a question that I would defer to Dr. Henshaw. Obviously, this is a recommendation that came from her. She and the public health officials in her office, as well as the medical officers of health throughout AHS, are working to respond to the pandemic and continue to provide her office and government with the up-to-date data on the spread as we continue to respond to the pandemic, Mr. Speaker. This is a recommendation that came from Dr. Henshaw on the basis of the evidence that was before her, so I would defer to her to be able to provide any further information about that, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Given that Chantel from Aradia Fitness said, quote, "We went above and beyond. We did not have a single case, and this closure is a band-aid solution to a much larger problem, and it is a measly attempt to make it look like the government is doing something. And given these owners are not against public health orders, but they do not deserve to be closed just so that this Premier appears to be taking COVID-19 seriously, and this government has not stated the number of outbreaks related to dance or yoga or fitness studios. So to the Minister, what evidence do you have for closing them over other businesses? How many cases were linked to these studios, and how many cases will this order prevent?"
The Honourable the Minister of Health.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker. And let me be clear, gyms are allowed to continue to be open, as well as recreation centres. It was group fitness that Dr. Henshaw had concerns with. Since the relaunch, there were 3 super spreader events that occurred in group fitness, Mr. Speaker. The member opposite, I'm sure, will get a chance to be able to provide more information and ask me more questions later on, Mr. Speaker. But I can say again that there were 3 super spreader events that happened at group fitness that he's again upset, Mr. Speaker, in getting the answer. I'm trying to answer your question, Mr. Speaker. There were 3 super spreader events that happened at group fitness. That was the concern that Dr. Henshaw had. Happy to answer the next questions.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie.
Given that this isn't the first time this UCP government screwed over small business with their mishandling of COVID-19, back in May, the Premier waited until the very last minute to delay the reopening of business businesses in Calgary and Brooks, costing small businesses thousands of dollars on spoiled stock, staffing costs, and other expenses. And given that ever since this failure of leadership that caused struggling small business to shoulder extra costs, owners have been calling for a clear evidence-based index so that they have the ability to plan ahead. To the Minister, what is the delay? Why are you continuing to ignore small business owners? Small business deserve a clear evidence-based index.
The Honourable Minister of Health.
That's exactly what we provided, Mr. Speaker, and we provided it since the beginning of the pandemic. I mean, we're going to fight over semantics. There's a map on the website, Mr. Speaker. We've broken it down by municipality and local geographic area, Mr. Speaker, so that all Albertans can see the spread of COVID throughout our communities, and we will continue to be able to listen to the advice of the Chief Medical Officer of Health as we respond to the pandemic in a dynamic way. As we get more and more information from the Chief Medical Officer of Health, we're going to continue to get her recommendations. That's always going to be based on evidence, and our targeted measures will continue to be focused and targeted on that information.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford has a question to ask.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Yesterday, I was honoured to be joined by Indigenous advocates Victoria Sedgwick, Tony Snow, and Michelle Robinson to call on the UCP to include Indigenous genocide in Bill 205, which recognizes and condemns genocide. Recognizing Indigenous genocide is a recommendation outlined in the TRC and in the National Inquiry into Missing and Murdered Indigenous Women and Girls. To the Minister of Indigenous Relations, will you work with me to include this recognition in Bill 205 so all members of this Assembly can move forward on the path to reconciliation?
The Honourable Minister of Justice and the Solicitor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the truth is that our government is strongly against any act of hate, and we recognize the terrible atrocities that have happened in our nation's history, and we stand with those who survived. But instead of focusing on symbolic gestures and virtual signaling, we have decided to take a real practical steps approach to work with members of our First Nation communities and leaders so that the prosperity and the opportunity that is available for all Albertans are also available to them, Mr. Speaker.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Ellerslie.
No answer again. Given whenever I ask about this important subject, I'm always met with these kind of talking points. But given last week, a senior advisor to the Premier argued outright denial of Indigenous genocide and calls this an extreme NDP position, while in truth these are the recommendations of the TRC and the final report of the National Inquiry. And given the UCP bends over backwards to minimize the harm of racist writings by Paul Bunner and Chris Champion, to the Minister, why do you care more about defending racism in your own ranks than listening to Indigenous recommendations to combat it?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, this is classical NDP. All they know how to do is to sow division and smear and want to pick Albertans against themselves. They had 4 years. The NDP had 4 years. On each and every of these items, they never lifted a finger. But it is convenient for them to always talk about it, and that's what they do. Mr. Speaker, on this side of the aisle, we are taking practical steps to work with our First Nation communities to make sure that the opportunities that are available to all Albertans are also available to them. Mr. Speaker, the team angry, they are heckling.
The Honourable Member for Edmonton Rutherford.
That answer is just unbelievable. Given the sponsor of Bill 205 uses a UN understanding that genocide is the intent to destroy a nation, racial, ethnic, or religious group with acts such as removing children, killing members, and preventing births of a group, how is ripping children from their home through the 60 scoop in residential schools not genocide? How are blankets ridden with smallpox purposely given with the intent to kill not genocide? How is the forced sterilization of Indigenous women not genocide? If this isn't genocide, what is?
The Honourable the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, we are committed to moving forward with through reconciliation and partnership with our Indigenous Albertans and standing with them against any form of racism. This side of the aisle, Mr. Speaker, has been clear from day one. We would not indulge or accept any form of racism against any ethnic community. But, Mr. Speaker, that is why just this afternoon, I made a historic announcement, to ban the practice of carding, which is, by the way, what our First Nation communities have been asking for decades. The NDP had 4 years to work on that particular issue. Like classical NDP, they did nothing.
The Honourable Member for Central Peace, Notley.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Rural crime is a problem in Alberta. Long response times by RCMP, isolated farms and homes, and a perceived catch-and-release justice system that allows thieves to be back out committing crimes has rural Albertans frustrated. Last year, when the people of Alberta fired the NDP, we promised in our platform that we would tackle rural crime with more officers in rural areas and a tough-on-crime approach. Earlier this year, the legislature helped me pass my motion 505 to set up a civilian corps to assist officers so that their time could be better spent with serious criminal matters. To the Minister of Justice, what progress have you and your ministry made on our campaign promise to fight rural crime?
The Honourable Minister of Justice, Solicitor General.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and to the member from Central Peace Notley. Mr. Speaker, our rural crime strategy is built on 3 pillars: response time reduction, crime deterrence, and strengthen the property right. The Rapid Response Initiative is well underway, and we have 400 additional officers responding to calls that would have previously gone to the RCMP. That means, Mr. Speaker, 400 additional boots on the ground, reducing response times and boosting the visibility of law enforcement across our province.
The Honourable Member for Central Peace, Notley.
Given that in my constituency this fall, a person who was on probation committed a home invasion and assault, and given he was arrested the same day and held in remand a few days, then released on bail with conditions, and given that he breached those conditions, was arrested, then released pending a court date, and then given that date came, he was then given a new date, so he is still free to commit crimes jeopardizing the safety of people within the community, and given that my constituents are tired of a system that allows criminals to make a mockery of our courts, what is our government doing to stop the catch-and-release system so criminals are not out in the community harming honest, hard-working Albertans?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker, we know that rural crime begins and ends with trespassing on private property. So we took action to protect law-abiding property owners by passing legislation to bring in tougher penalties for trespassers. We have created special teams through ALART in partnership with local law enforcement agencies that will focus specifically on repeat offenders and scrap metal theft. By 2023, Mr. Speaker, there will be 50 additional crime prosecutors ready and waiting to prosecute the charges brought forward by those teams.
The Honourable Member.
Given that last week a local resident was driving down the highway when he noticed his trailer that had been stolen a few days before was parked along the highway, hooked behind a truck that was having mechanical problems, and given that he called police and friends to help apprehend the suspects, and given that at least one of the suspects was on bail, and the suspects had a loaded stolen gun, drugs and drug paraphernalia, and a lot of stolen property, and given that one of the suspects was allowed to drive away from that scene, and then another was released that day, Minister, what can Albertans do to help stop the revolving door in the justice system without becoming vigilantes with a justice system that doesn't seem just?
The Honourable Minister of Justice.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And Mr. Speaker, let me also thank once again the member from Central Peace Notley for his tireless advocacy on this particular front. Like as I've always said, Mr. Speaker, on this side of the aisle, we will continue to work hard to ensure that we keep our local communities, including our rural communities, safe from all of this particular crime. And we are continuing that particular work, and we will not rest until the work to keep our communities is done.
Honourable members, that concludes the time allotted for oral question period. I would encourage all members while they travel home to their families this week to do so in a safe and cautious manner. In 30 seconds or less, we will proceed with the remainder of the routine.
Presenting reports by standing and special committees.
The Honourable Member for Calgary West.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and it certainly is a pleasure to speak before you, especially at my desk. So thank you very much. Mr. Speaker, as chair of the Standing Committee on Private Bills, Private Members, Public Bills, I'm pleased to table the committee's final report on Bill PR1, the Sisters of the Precious Blood of Edmonton Repeal Act, sponsored by the Honourable Member for Peace River. This bill was referred to the committee on June 4th, 2020. Mr. Speaker, the committee's final report recommends that Bill PR1 proceed. I request concurrence of the Assembly in the final report on Bill PR1. Thank you, sir.
Honourable members, a request for concurrence has been asked for. This is a debatable motion. If anyone would like to debate the motion, please rise and indicate so now. Seeing none, I am prepared to put the question. Honourable members, as proposed by the member for Calgary West for concurrence in the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. My opinion, the ayes have it. That motion is carried and so ordered.
Presenting petitions, notices of motions, introduction of bills, tabling returns and reports.
Are there tablings? Seeing none.
Tablings to the clerk. Deferred divisions.
Honourable members, it's time for orders of the day, orders du jour.
Committee of the Whole.
I'd like to call Committee of the Whole to order. Committee of the Whole has under consideration Bill 36, the Geothermal Resource Development Act. We are not on any amendments. Are there any members wishing to join debate on Bill 36? I will call the question. We are not on an amendment. Oh, we are? Oh, well, we're on Amendment A1. So you would like me to call the question on Amendment A1? Okay, on Amendment A1, all those in favor, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. An amendment has been defeated. We are now back on no amendments on the main bill. Any members wishing to join debate? The Honourable Member for Edmonton West Henday.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I rise to put forward an amendment on behalf of the member from Calgary Mountain View.
Honourable members, this will be known as Amendment A2. Honourable member, please proceed.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Once again, I put forward this amendment on behalf of the member from Calgary Mountain View, and it reads, that the Geothermal Resource Development Act be amended by adding the following after Section 3, geothermal resources vested in Crown 3.11, the right, title, and interest in all geothermal resources associated with minerals or subsurface reservoirs in Alberta are vested in and reserved to the Crown and right of Alberta and may be disposed of only in accordance with this Act. 2, despite subsection 1, the Crown and right of Alberta may transfer ownership of a geothermal resource on terms approved by the Lieutenant Governor and Council. B, in Section 27, by adding the following after Clause B, B1, establishing procedures for recording transfers and other instruments affecting the ownership of a geothermal resource. C, in Section 31.6, in the proposed Section 10.2, by striking out the owner of the mineral title in any land in Alberta and substituting the owner of a geothermal resource in Alberta. Now, this amendment that we're proposing here today is in regards to amending the geothermal rights to the Crown and not the mineral rights holder. This is something that has been very clearly put forward by the geothermal industry. They've been asking for this, and the government have, I'm sure, heard that this was an issue in the proposed legislation that they put forward. This will give more clarity and ultimately avoid conflicts. We've heard from the industry that they are very concerned that at this point, with what we see in the legislation, it might be very hard for them to come to an agreement with mineral rights holders that work for both parties. Companies, once again, are very worried that the bill in its current form could risk more lawsuits and feel that making these rights separate will make it easier for them to develop the industry. In the regulations, it should be straightforward to find solutions for mineral rights holders that also want to develop geothermal resources. I would just finally state one more time that this is something that has been asked for very clearly from the industry, and if the government does not support this amendment, they are simply going against the wishes of the geothermal industry. Thank you.
Any other members wishing to debate on Amendment A2? I will call the question on Amendment A2 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton West Sunday on behalf of the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. No. The amendment has been defeated. We are back on the main bill, Bill 36. Any members wishing to join debate? The Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clareview.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. It's my pleasure to rise and speak to this bill. This is actually my first opportunity to speak to it. Now, I'll keep my comments fairly short, but I will have more to say a little later on this bill, just because a few things I want to highlight. So, you know, a number of my caucus colleagues have spoken in favor of this bill. I, too, am supportive of this bill. The NDP opposition has tried to put forward so far 2 amendments. The previous amendment that was just voted on was something that came directly from industry. And so as a former member of Executive Council, I will, express my disappointment that the government has not accepted an amendment that really would actually help what's the word I'm looking for? It would help ensure that that there aren't potentially future conflicts. Now, I'm momentarily about to introduce an amendment similar to that about surface rights, so that again we can avoid conflicts between industry and between landowners, which will actually be to the benefit of everyone involved, Madam Chair. Now, geothermal, there are significant opportunities within our province. I do want it on the record that under the NDP government, there was a number of pilot projects and initiatives that we put forward. In fact, under my former Ministry of Economic Development and Trade, we issued a number of grants through a few different programs, one of them being the CARES program, the Community Regional Economic Support Program, for municipalities to explore the ability and options of moving forward with geothermal. We know we have the expertise. We know we have a significant number of wells that are already drilled that could very easily be converted to produce geothermal. And so, happy to see the government is putting forward this regulatory structure. Again, I would encourage the minister to take a look at albertasfuture.ca. We have recently put out a paper on geothermal, have invited all Albertans to participate in a discussion around that to provide their thoughts and inputs. We've also consulted with industry to get their take on it. There's a number of things that this current bill is missing as far as ensuring that there are tools available to move forward. So the minister has said, once this regulatory framework is put forward, then there'll just be a rush for companies to jump into the geothermal space. That's not what we've heard through our consultations. That there needs to be a couple of other either programs that will function, at the same time as this regulatory framework that will in fact spur geothermal exploration and geothermal development. I will remind members of this House that, once again, the reason Alberta has such a robust energy sector is because governments of the day, both federal and provincial, put in place a number of significant programs in order to de-risk the industry as it was trying to get off the ground, and also played a significant role in our oil and gas sector, and without it, I really believe that we wouldn't be in the same place. We would not have enjoyed the jobs, the wealth that has been created because of our natural resources. So this is a great example of where there is a role for government to play in addition to creating a regulatory framework. And I encourage the government to look at how they can, in fact, spur development in this area, and I encourage them to be open-minded when talking to industry as far as what they're looking for above and beyond a regulatory framework. So, having said that, we'll give the government an opportunity to look at another amendment. This one, Madam Chair, is to do with the Surface Rights Board, and I will speak to it momentarily once you receive the top copy. Oh, can I keep the bottom?
You should have it memorized. Be known as Amendment A3. Honourable Member, please proceed.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. I'll read it in to the record. So this is moved on behalf of the member for Calgary Mountain View. That Bill 36, Geothermal Resource Development Act, be amended by adding the following immediately after Section 19 sub 4. 5. If a dispute arises as to the compensation payable pursuant to subsection 4, the compensation is to be determined by the Surface Rights Board. Now, what this has to do with, Madam Chair, is the fact that we know for our oil and gas sector that in order to ensure if there is a dispute between the leaseholder and the mineral rights holder and the leaseholder, that this provides a mechanism for them to be able to resolve it. And so really what we're trying to do here with this amendment, Madam Chair, is to put in place a mechanism that will help expedite a resolution should a dispute inevitably arise. This is something that, again, the Surface Rights Board already exists for our traditional oil and gas sector. Again, this will ensure that companies that are looking to get into the geothermal space can get into it knowing that there is a mechanism should disputes arise. This is something that industry as well has asked for. Again, Madam Chair, we know that there are potential, there's a potential for conflicts. Like I said, this just provides a mechanism and a route for it to travel, which will provide industry with certainty. I mean, I'm sure, the minister will talk about how well his office could get involved in helping to deal with a dispute, but I can tell you that industry prefers for political bodies not to be getting involved in disputes and would rather have a clear line of sight Again, this exists for oil and gas sector. This will also give landlords a peace of mind. I know that the government has members that are very, very adamant about landowners' rights, and in fact, they would probably put that as their top priority. This not only protects our companies, but also protects our landlords. And so I really see this as a win-win. It does not delay the bill whatsoever, and giving certainty to industry and to landlords and landowners across the province, I think will actually help expedite companies getting into this space. So with that, I encourage all members of the Assembly to support this amendment.
Any other members wishing to speak to Amendment A3? Seeing none, I will call the question on Amendment A3 as moved by the Honourable Member for Edmonton Beverly Clearview on behalf of the Honourable Member for Calgary Mountain View. All those in favour, please say aye. Any opposed, please say no. That amendment has been defeated. We are back on the main bill, Bill 46 in Committee of the Whole. Any members wishing to speak? See, Honourable Member for Calgary West.
Chair, thank you very much for your time. I'd like to thank the honourable members certainly for their robust amendments on this bill. With that, I'd like to rise and report progress.
Rise and report progress? Or would you like to vote? Shall I call the question on Bill 36?
Sorry, I thought we had to rise and report first.
No, we'll do that
okay,
after.
Apologies. We'll question. Thank you.
Okay. On the question of Bill 36, the Geothermal Resource Development Act, on the clauses of the bill, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. On title and preamble, are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried. Shall the bill be reported? Are you agreed? Agreed. Any opposed? Carried.
Now, Madam Chair, thank you very much. And now we rise and report. Thank you very much.
Having heard the motion to rise and report on Bill 36, all those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. We shall now rise and report.
Speaker, the Committee of the Whole has under consideration certain bills. The committee reports the following bills. Bill 36. Madam Speaker, I wish to table copies of all amendments considered by the Committee of the Whole on this date for the official records of the Assembly.
Assembly concur in the report. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried.
Under Government Bills and Orders for second reading, Bill 44, Financial Statutes Amendment Act 2020, adjourned debate, Honourable Mr. Nally.
The Honourable Minister of Natural Gas.
Madam Speaker, it's been a good week and it's been a long week, and so I move that the Assembly adjourn until 1:30 p.m. on Monday, November 23rd, 2020.
The motion. All those in favour, please say aye. Aye. Any opposed, please say no. So carried. House stands adjourned until Monday, 1:30. Order.